Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Source. I'm your host, Russell Nash, and this is the #1 spot for Highlander the card game, as well as all other Highlander-related material. Before we jump into today's video, I just want to give a massive thank you and shout out to everyone who has already subscribed so far. This experience is completely new to me, and I have never done anything like this before. I only want to produce the best Highlander CCG and Highlander content for you that I can. So a big thank you to everyone who has already subscribed. It really does mean a lot. In today's video, I'm going to be detailing how to play Highlander the card game. And in my opinion, this video is going to be the most detailed explanation that you can find on YouTube. So without further ado, let's get into it. Highlander CCG is designed to be played as a duel to the death between two immortals struggling to reach the time of the gathering, where the stroke of a sword and the fall of a head will release the power of the quickening. Both players will be using a combination of attack cards and defense cards, as well as support cards. The support cards include different locations, situations, events, plots, and edge cards that you can use to your advantage to put your opponent right where you want them. Think of the duel as a battle that lasts many years, and think of the support cards as a warrior would use his or her surroundings to their benefit. First things first, you and your opponent will each need your own 50-card Highlander deck. You can have up to 6 of each card in your deck unless it's restricted. This video is not intended as a deck building guide, rather a how to play. So I will be making a deck building guide later on, so be on the lookout for that video. In Highlander, your deck is known as your endurance, and a warrior needs a strong endurance to survive the harrows of combat. Each player can take a certain amount of damage before losing the game. In Highlander, your life is known as your ability, and each player starts the game with 15 ability or life. When you take damage from an attack in Highlander, your ability or life is reduced by the amount of damage that you received. For example, if I take 2 damage, my ability or life is reduced by 2. Your hand size is directly affected by what your current ability is. You can only hold or draw up to what your current ability is. For example, if my ability is at 10, I can only hold in my hand or draw up to 10 cards. Once a player starts taking damage or ability loss in Highlander, they will notice fewer and fewer cards in their hand, limiting their options for offense and defense. Once a player draws the last card in their endurance, they will become exhausted, just like a warrior would in real life if they ran out of endurance. If you become exhausted, you do not lose the game. It only signifies a loss of ability. When a player becomes exhausted, they will lose 5 ability, reshuffle their endurance, and continue the battle. The goal of Highlander CCG is to knock your opponent's ability down to 0 or to land a successful headshot. A headshot is a modified upper attack that if is successful, the game is over, no matter what your current ability is, so don't lose your head. Now that we know what our endurance is and our ability is, let's begin. You're going to need a 6-sided dice and something to keep track of. A simple piece of paper will do just fine. Each player will shuffle their endurance and then allow their opponent to cut their deck. After each player has cut their opponent's deck, place them to one side. Then, each player will roll the 6-sided dice to see who goes first. The person who rolls the highest number will go first. Once you have determined who's going first, each player will draw their opening hand equal to their starting ability, which is 15. You might be thinking that 15 cards is a pretty big hand size, but in Highlander, there are no mulligans, meaning you cannot discard your hand and draw again. The large ability or hand size will make more sense the more you play Highlander, as you will start to see all of the different options and possibilities this allows. Something you need to be aware of in Highlander is that On your opponent's turn, you do not perform any actions. So if your opponent plays a card telling you to perform a certain action, you will wait until your turn to perform that action. The first sequence of play is known as the sweep phase. The sweep phase is where you will sweep the cards that have already been played and place them in your discard pile. Think of your discard pile as the graveyard. These cards have already been played and you are sweeping the board to make room for your next turn. At the beginning of the game, neither player will have any cards in play, so nothing needs to be swept. This brings us to the second phase of play, known as the may-do, must-do phase. The may-do, must-do phase is where you or your opponent have to follow all of the stipulations that have been laid out on your turn or your opponent's turn. For example, you or your opponent plays a card that says, your opponent may not play a defense from their hand during their turn. An example of a must-do effect would be you or your opponent playing a card that says, your opponent must discard a dodge from their hand to play a dodge. These are just two examples of the many cards that dictate may-do, must-do effects. Must-do effects have to be satisfied before may-do effects, so remember that. After you have satisfied all of your may-do, must-do effects, you will then move on to your defense phase. The defense phase is where you will play your defense cards in the hopes of defending yourself against your opponent's attacks. You can play one defense card for each attack coming at you. If your opponent has played multiple attacks and one defense will block or dodge all of the attacks, you have successfully defended yourself. Some cards will dictate that one defense will not block or dodge multiple attacks. This is where playing multiple defenses needs to happen. If your opponent plays multiple attacks, they have to be defended in the order they were played. After you have successfully defended yourself or not, you will move on to the next sequence of play, known as the attack phase. Normally, you only have one attack opportunity per turn unless stated otherwise by a card that you play or a weapon that you are using. I will be going over the different weapons used in Highlander in another video, so be on the lookout for that. If your opponent has played a card or has an effect in play restricting you from attacking, you cannot play any attacks or make an exertion for one. I will be going over what an exertion is later in the video. In your attack phase, just remember that during your defense phase, if you played a successful block, you cannot attack to any areas that you just blocked. If you choose to dodge the attack, however, you can still attack to any area unless the dodge you play specifically says that you cannot. Some immortals do allow you to attack to areas that you just blocked, but normally you can't. After you have played your attack or attacks, you will then move on to the next sequence of play, known as the ability adjustment phase. Once you reach this phase, you can no longer play any cards. If you were not able to defend yourself successfully from some of your opponent's attacks, or they have a card or effect in play which lowers your ability, you would make those adjustments now. If you have played a card or have an effect in play which raises your ability, you would also make those adjustments now. Once you have adjusted your ability accordingly, you will then move on to the last sequence of play, known as the draw discard phase. If you reach this phase and you have more or less cards in your hand than your current ability, you will either draw up to or discard down to what your current ability is. In Highlander, you do not have to draw up to your current ability if your endurance is running low, but you do have to discard down to what your current ability is. Remember, your hand size is directly affected by what your ability is. If you forget to draw during this phase, you will have to wait until your next draw or discard phase to do so, so don't forget. Both players will repeat this cycle until the duel is finished. Now, I mentioned earlier in the video about making an exertion. Think of an exertion as your immortal exerting some power from their endurance. To make an exertion, you will reveal the top 5 cards from your endurance. Any cards not used from this exertion will be placed in your discard pile. You can only play 1 card from an exertion. The other 4 will be placed in your discard pile, meaning there is a price to pay for the exertion. Normally, you can only make 1 exertion per turn and for one specific thing. You can make an exertion in either your defensive phase or your attack phase. I will give you several examples of needing to make an exertion. The first example of needing to make an exertion would be that your opponent has attacked you and you don't have a defense card in your hand. So, during your defense phase, you will declare to your opponent, I need to make an exertion for a defense. You will then reveal the top 5 cards from your endurance in the hopes of finding a defense that works. Another example of needing to make an exertion would be that during your attack phase, you don't have an attack card in your hand. So, you will follow the same process. You will declare to your opponent, I need to make an exertion for an attack. You will reveal the top 5 cards from your endurance in the hopes of finding an attack that works. The remaining 4 cards will be placed in your discard pile. Another example of needing to make an exertion would be making an exertion just for the sake of making an exertion. In Highlander, you have to do something on your turn. You cannot simply pass to your opponent. So, in this case, you would declare that either in your defense phase or your attack phase, I'm going to be making an exertion just to make an exertion. All 5 cards from this exertion will be placed in your discard pile. This exertion would satisfy the stipulation of you doing something on your turn. Remember, you can only make 1 exertion per turn and for one specific thing, either in your defense phase or your attack phase, so choose carefully. Once you make an exertion, it will end that phase, and you can no longer play any cards for that phase. There are cards that alter the size of exertions, but that's also for a later video. Let's talk about the different attacks and defenses found in Highlander. There are basic attacks, basic blocks, dodges, and special attacks. Basic attacks do 2 damage. If you block an attack, think of your immortal using their sword or their weapon to physically block the incoming blow. If you dodge an attack, think of your immortal as jumping, dodging, stepping to one side, or backing away from an incoming blow. Special attacks are attacks that normally have a certain stipulation for your opponent to follow for them to be able to defend themselves. For example, an unblockable or undodgeable effect. Special attacks cannot be played from an exertion. Now, let's talk about something really cool, making a power blow or a power block. A power blow or a power block is exactly what it sounds like, a more powerful attack or defense. A power blow does an additional 2 damage, resulting in 4 damage total. Making a power blow or a power block requires an exertion. Some cards will allow you to make or block a power blow without an exertion, but normally you have to make an exertion. I'm going to give you a couple good examples of using an exertion to make or block a power blow. Let's say my turn comes and I want to make a power blow. So, during my attack phase, I will play my attack card and then I will declare to my opponent, this is a power blow. I will reveal the top 5 cards from my endurance and then place them in my discard pile. Now, let's say it's my turn and my opponent has played a power blow against me. So during my defense phase, I will play my block card, and then I will declare to my opponent, this is a power block. I will reveal the top 5 cards from my endurance and place them in the discard pile. The cards being discarded are the price that I am paying for making my attack or my defense more powerful. If you block a power blow but fail to make it a power block, you will take 2 damage instead of 4. A good example of this would be during my defense phase. My opponent has made a power blow against me, and I have the correct block in my hand. But I want to save my exertion for my attack phase so I can make my own power blow. I'll play my block card, and I will declare to my opponent, this is not a power block. I will then take 2 damage. Even though I played the correct block, it is not a power block. I'm going to give you an example of making an exertion for a defense against a power blow, finding a block that works, and still taking damage. Let's say on my opponent's turn, they made a power blow against me. During my defense phase, I declare to my opponent, I need to make an exertion for a defense. I then reveal the top 5 cards from my endurance. I find a block that works, and I play it. You might be thinking that this constitutes a power block, but it does not. Remember, you can only make an exertion for one specific thing. In this case, I'm making the exertion for a defense, not for a power block, so I will take 2 damage. Something that you need to be aware of while playing Highlander is that when your opponent makes a power blow against you, you can, on your turn, make your first attack hidden. Special attacks cannot be made hidden. Let's talk a little bit about the support cards that I mentioned. Those locations, situations, events, plots, and edge cards. Locations, situations, events, and plot cards are considered special cards. Edge cards are not considered special cards. You can only play one special card per turn, either in your defense phase or your attack phase. You can only have one location in play at a time. For example, during my defense phase, I play my location, and on my opponent's turn, they play a location. My location is immediately placed in my discard pile. Situations and plot cards are cards that remain in play unless removed from play, and they have reoccurring effects. Events and edge cards remain in play for your turn and your opponent's turn, and then are swept to your discard pile on your next turn. There is so much to cover in Highlander CCG, and this video was just a basic guide to get you familiar with the different phases of play, the terminology, and the rules in Highlander. Highlander is a brutal and unforgiving game. It is a duel between 2 immortals vying to be the last and win the prize. I'm going to be making many more videos detailing the more complex strategies that you can find in Highlander CCG. I'm also going to be making a video where I'm talking about the different support cards that I think are the best ones to have in your deck to give you that added advantage in combat. If you found this video helpful, please leave a like, and if you haven't done so, subscribe so you don't miss any future Highlander CCG content. I'm also going to be making videos detailing a history of some of the most popular immortals from the movies and the television series. Tell me down in the comments who some of your favorite immortals are. Don't lose your heads, be on the lookout for that next video, and remember, there can be only one collectible card game.